It is my pleasure to welcome you, Simran, to your podcast, Unmasked.
Thank you, Ish. Thanks for having me on my own podcast and for unmasking me.
Fantastic. So, are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, but before we jump in, I'd love to do a quick ritual. Let's take a quick breath in and just arrive. All right, now I'm ready.
Let's do this. So, I would love to begin with your background. You have a master's in pharmacy, in public health. You worked in big pharma like Shire Biogen. You've also worked at some amazing startups like Foundation Medicine, Mayo Health Clinic, that startup. So you have had a very successful career as a commercial leader in the biotech healthcare space. And then something changed in your journey. Walk us through what happened.
Mm-hmm. So let me kind of start from the roots, from where it started. As you know, we grew up in Delhi to a very ambitious and a very scientific mom and dad. And I think as we grow up, as South Asians, we're given this very tight checklist of how you're supposed to be. And I spent a significant portion of my life trying to cross off things on that checklist. So, going to pharmacy school was because dad was a pharmacist and I was going to go join his company. And dad decided to sell off his company while I was in business school. And then I was like, okay, now what? I got into the real world at GSK and absolutely hated doing sales in Mumbai, in Delhi. It was a very grounding, humbling experience from being Simran GP Singh and given everything on a platter to finally having to figure out life on my own. And what ended up happening was that I wanted to go out and explore. I had this deep calling inside me which said that there's more to life, there's more to experience. And so about 13 years ago, I decided to pack my bags and move to Boston. Went to graduate school here in public health, again, got another degree, went into biotech, and had the opportunity to work around some very disruptive therapeutics. Went on into diagnostics because I think my passion has always been how to enable people to live a healthier life. And so the natural progression was from therapeutics, let's go into diagnostics. And then I got this opportunity to join a very upcoming innovative startup out of the Mayo Clinic in cardiology, launching AI ECG algorithms. And there I was working with the creme de la creme cardiology group in the US and the world, launching AI algorithms. I was working to save people's lives, on people's heart health while my own heart was aching. And I think that is what was sort of the inflection point right during COVID when I was like, what am I doing? Why am I here? What's my calling? And it was a 5-year journey into exploration, experimentation, learning new skills, and honestly going back to my roots of yoga, pranayama, of volunteering, of seva, of service that then has brought me into this point where we currently are.
So there is a lot to unpack there. You mentioned, being at the pinnacle of your career, working with the brilliant minds at Mayo Clinic, and Mayo Clinic is world-renowned organization, right? So you're working with the best doctors, the best physicians, and you're building this disruptive technology which is going to have such a positive impact on people's lives. But you mentioned about heart health and how you were not feeling aligned. And I would love for you to go deeper into that story of what did you feel at that point? Like, what was the discomfort? What was the seeking? What was it that actually led you down the path of even seeking and questioning what you had?
Mm-hmm. I think up until that point, I was chasing, I was hustling, I was following that guidebook on I need to get a promotion, I need to buy that house, I need to prove to my parents that I'm as good as a guy, because that is something that always at the back of my mind, I was reminded, as a little girl growing up, I was reminded, I was in a way told that you'll never be as good because you're not a boy. And I think I spent those years just like proving that I could have enough money and maybe even more than any guy in my shoes would. But that also meant that I had never really allowed myself to discover what I really want. I
Hmm.
didn't have that level of self awareness. And when COVID hit, we were trapped here. Mom and dad were in Delhi. There was so much death, there was so much loss around us
Hmm.
that it kind of pushed me into that inflection point to say that why is there so much suffering? And then remembering, even before AI and technology and all of these therapeutics, going back to the way that our grandmothers lived, our ancestors lived, and understanding and realizing that they had something that we didn't. They had peace, they had happiness, they had love, they had fulfillment. And it put me on that path of realizing that yes, I have the title, I have the money, I have everything, I have the guy or almost have the guy. Why am I not happier? Why am I so disenchanted? And is this it? Because personally, I expected to feel a lot happier and I wasn't. And, you know, taking care of other people's hearts, but ignoring my own heart,
Hmm.
not ever filling my own cup,
Yeah.
not knowing how to receive. Like these are all questions that I started asking.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you know what really jumps out from your story is that masks, they can be useful. They can
Hmm.
help you achieve, they can help you get to a certain point in life. But then there is this pause because you've
Hmm.
been chasing somebody else's expectations and somebody else's dreams. And then you actually look at that mask and say, is this really me, or is this tying me down into a version that I don't want to be? What I'd love to now dig into is that moment where you said, this is it, enough is enough. I'm not going to let even another moment pass me by, and I'm going to change direction. So tell us about that story.
So that pivotal moment or that pivotal inflection point came to me when we were together in Peru and we were hiking Mount Salcante, and you being the national tennis player and our guide just like went along, and me who hadn't taken care of my health was struggling to even take another step, another breath. And you decided to leave me behind and you told me that, hey, listen, you gotta wait, you can't get to that peak. And knowing how competitive I am, I'm like, why can't I get to that peak? And I kept pushing myself to the point that I was almost about to break down. And I had this really magical, almost out of body experience where probably the higher version inside me, or this little voice inside me, was like, is this it? Are you just going to give up? Are you going to die of a heart attack? Are you going to give up on life? And it made me realize how fragile we are as human beings. being
Yes.
surrounded by those hummingbirds, being in the mountains with the horses and watching the condors fly over me. They were asking me to take a leap, to
Mm,
surrender, you know. And I was like, you know what? I have to give myself a chance.
mm,
I've spent my life just being dictated by my head, which is where most of us high achievers do. Our mind is constantly telling us how we're not enough. We're not good enough. We're not smart enough. What can go wrong? Because it's a safety tool, it's a safety mechanism. Our head hasn't evolved to make us happy. And we in the Western world don't spend enough time tapping into our heart, connecting our head and our heart. And
yes.
that's the missing link that I discovered. I wasn't tapping into my heart. I wasn't finding those moments of presence, of sacred pause, of connecting with my true self, of connecting with nature, of being in a co-creation with nature, with universe, and just chasing and just following what I had learned would lead to success. And all this while, even though I was chasing success, what I was seeking was love and connection. And the aha moment that I had was that, I can already get the connection and the love. I don't have to find that hard route of hustling, of chasing, of being successful, of being significant to get to that love. And that started a completely new chapter of my life, of finding that love, of finding that connection. But before that, finding my true self and finding my calling.
Mm, that is so beautiful because you spoke about so many themes that are so interrelated and talk about the duality life, right? You mentioned the brain versus the heart. You mentioned chasing versus being. You mentioned
Mhm.
hustling versus surrendering. And those are all very, yin versus the yang. Like you have to do things, you have to hustle and you have to make things work, even in the world of personal transformation. I know it's all too focused on, wake up at 5 a.m. and do your cold showers and whatnot. But there's also this very important core element of surrendering, of not knowing what the future holds, of lack of clarity, of knowing that you have things to shed, but not really knowing exactly how to go about it. And so up until this point, you've had your success and your career and your achievements and in both personal and professional life. You've had a moment where you've said, I need something else. I need something different. I need something more. I want to explore life. Now let's get into what did you do after coming back from Peru?
Mhm. Yes. I think so many of us, especially if you think about midlife for us as women, we're always doing things for others. I was doing things for others. I had never really prioritized myself. And so two things happened. A, I realized that I needed to prioritize myself. I needed to find myself. I needed to allow myself to be. And the realization that, yes, we all love biohacking and the cold plunges and let's go lift weights and doing all the masculine things that as women we do to try to prove that we're good enough. But healing and transformation and being is a very, very feminine, subtle process. And it's extremely simple. And I discovered the simplicity of it. I discovered how easy and wonderful and joyous it is to just be in flow, to have fun, and I had done a lot until that point, right from like Tony Robbins to Paul McKenna and Mind Valley and Isha Yoga. And I ended up in a plant medicine journey which completely broke me open. And as a way to integrate that plant medicine journey, I learned the power of simply connecting with your breath. And that simple moment just shifted something inside me. It was like a magic potion that was missing in my life. And I went to uh, back to my roots of reading everything I could about yoga, about pranayama, which is the core pillar of yoga. Prana, the life force, the healing ability, the power that exists amongst each of us, but we've somewhere forgotten how to use it. Before 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, where there were no medications, this is what the ancient mystics and the yogis did to take care of themselves, to reach their highest potential. And I ended up becoming a trauma informed breathwork instructor. I had always been a Reiki master and had never allowed myself to use that skill because the scientist in me couldn't prove it. But when I reached that portal of sort of unmasking and unbecoming and awakening and allowing myself to discover my truest self, all these different skills of energy and sounds and breath meditation that had been used for thousands of years and being lost in the Western world of artificial intelligence and technology and therapeutics, where we're just going around putting band-aids on us without really addressing the root cause. I found so much joy in that I started doing it for fun. You were one of my first guinea pigs, and I'd love for you to share your experience. But like, as you remember, 2 years ago, we just started doing workshops and inviting friends and family over, and each and every person started having these breakthroughs, started releasing things that they were carrying for years and years, things that you can't just talk your way out, you know things that were just trapped inside us from generations, the limitations, the foundations that we were putting on ourselves going forward while looking in the back mirror. And that's when, seeing the breakthroughs in people, seeing the shifts in people, but then taking it to another level and understanding the physiology of what happens during this breath and sound session, recording EEG waves and looking at how each and every person, they went from high beta waves, which are related to stress, to like alpha, which is the flow state, but then even deeper states of delta and theta, which are very difficult to experience in a waking state. When I saw that each and every person was showing these transitions, this longitudinal data, I knew that I had arrived at this inflection point, and I had finally allowed myself to get out of my own way and build something that can truly prevent disease, but also enable us to live happily, to live in well being, and to infuse that in everyday life.
Absolutely. And I think I want to double click on a couple of points, which I think would be really important for our listeners here. The first one
Mhm,
is, in the beginning of your journey, when you started questioning your life that you had created for yourself, I know that you were having some really difficult moments.
mhm,
You were suffering, if I can just use that word. Like your emotional health, your heart health, you were not at peace with yourself. And you and I, we've been living together for the past 4 or 5 years or so,
mhm,
and you never let it show. So it was after about maybe a year or something, like a crazy amount of time, that we went to meet somebody who's more aligned into the energy world. And they took one look at you and they said, hey, you seem depressed, and it's okay for you to acknowledge that to yourself and to others. My aha moment was to know that somebody I looked up to, you, somebody who I had followed for all of my life, was breaking, and I didn't even know that.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I want to
Yeah.
touch on is the courage it takes sometimes to actually accept your own feelings and give yourself the permission to feel
Mm-hmm.
them, and how much courage it actually needs to raise your hand and say, I need help.
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't expecting you to bring up that moment in Salem, but you're right. You know, you and I were casually taking a stroll during Halloween season, and we went into this really interesting looking store with all these masks. And I still remember, it's giving me goosebumps to think about it. And we go in, and I'm looking at this one idol of Ganesha that kind of really spoke to me. It reminded me back of Mumbai. And then we meet this really nice looking gentleman, and he's like, hey, I'm Andrew, it's good to meet you. And I said, yeah, it's great to meet you too. And he's like, what brings you here? And I'm like, nothing, we're just walking around. And then he paused, he stared into my eyes, and he said, hey, I see you.
Mhm,
You're okay. You're not alone.
mhm,
I know you're very depressed, but there are others out there that understand you.
mhm.
I understand you. And that moment, I had tears in my eyes that I was like trying so hard to control and hold. Um, Probably because as a girl, growing up, I was told that be strong, get it done, keep it together. Crying is weakness, emotions are weakness. That was the algorithm that I was living by. And even though you're my sister, my soul sister, my BFF, something inside me didn't feel like it was okay for me to share that despite all the external success and all the material possessions, I was actually miserable and I was suffering in silence.
Yeah.
And that's what I see in each and every person that I have worked with, hundreds of people, that we all have this external success.
Mhm.
And then we reach that inflection point where we know that something inside shifts and we decide that, you know what, our life is precious.
Yeah.
We deserve to be happy. We deserve to shed, to release, to come to terms with our feelings, our emotions, because our emotions are what make us human.
Mhm.
And there's always contrast in life. We're all in earth school. Nobody's life is perfect. But we live in a world of Instagram and TikTok where we see these perfect lives. We see all the projected happiness. And we're very connected, but extremely lonely.
Yeah.
Mental health is one of the biggest pandemics now after COVID. So many people take their own lives, which is heartbreaking to me. In our own family, we come from a family of psychologists and psychiatrists, and we've seen what a stigma it is in our culture to talk about mental health. And me working on heart disease and the physiological heart health, but realizing that the emotional heart health, the metaphorical heart, where love, pain, emotions live, is what leads to that physiological heart health. And we're not connecting. But more than that, we're constantly living in our heads. We're constantly in that fight or flight. We're constantly in the sympathetic. And we don't spend enough time being in the parasympathetic, being in the rest, digest, and calm state. And then the pharmacist inside me finally had that aha moment. When I allowed myself to release the emotions, the pain, the trauma, the fear, it opened up my heart to love, to community, to connection. And
Mhm.
I realized that every time that I was vulnerable, I showed someone my heart. They did the same. It
Yes.
is the pain, the shared experience of grief, of loss, that actually connects us, that actually brings us together, that leads to feelings of well being, that leads to peak health. We're all talking about longevity and peak health. What's the point of peak health if you're feeling miserable? What's the point of having $1 billion in your bank account if you don't know how to have fun, if you can't be happy, if you can't find those little moments of joy in your everyday life? And that's when I decided that I wanted to create that life for myself, for my community, and for each and every person that I touch, that I impact. I wanted to remind them what it means to come back home to themselves, to their true nature, to community, to love, to belonging, to sharing those deep, meaningful connections, but also doing it in a very scientific, evidence based manner, and dare I say, integrating AI into it.
Mm. Well, that is amazing. And that essentially is the mission of Tattva Health.
And it starts with self awareness, it starts with self acceptance. But then the magic really happens is when you shed those things, when you shift from being overly attached to your past experience, to your identity, and you shift into being an observer. You understand that you're not your head, you're not your body. You tap into that consciousness, that big picture, that interconnectedness, that all of us are much more than what has happened to us. And, I'd love to first welcome you as my co founder in Tattva Health. I'm extremely grateful that you, my sister, has left her corporate venture capital role, her McKinsey days, with all of your accolades and acumen from McKinsey and Cornell and everything you've done in climate tech, now come in full time to help me build Tattva. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what inspired you to join me. Is it just that you're my sister and you're like, okay, Simran's doing this, let me follow her? Or was it more? And if you could talk a little bit about your journey and what was that inflection point where you decided that Tattva was the right next step for you?
Yeah. I think my story is all about operating from my left brain. I've been very analytical all my life. I've loved data, I've loved numbers, fell in love with economics the first time I read about it, right? And growing up in Delhi, you see the extremes, right? So I was friends with people who were coming from very modest, humble backgrounds, who just had access to bare necessities. And I was friends with people who were wealthy and, the trust fund kids. And it gave me this deeper knowing from the very beginning that money doesn't make you happy, that anything that you create from a material perspective isn't at the core of your fulfillment. But
Mm-hmm.
then I moved to the US and, I joined McKinsey and Company, and all around everybody was chasing, right? Like, as you said, it was about the next promotion, and it was about just, living in St. Regis and having a butler. And it was just the luxury that I got used to. That I was like, oh, I like money, like I'm used to this. And I remember the first time my manager gave me a call to tell me that I had been promoted, and this was my, first promotion. McKinsey was my first job. I didn't really feel anything, and that was an interesting point for me because I had been working for a year and a half to get that promotion, and I finally get it, and I was like, oh, I guess on to the next one, right? Um, I joined soon after I knew I had to leave, and I joined a clean tech venture capital fund. And I spent 5.5 years of my life there. It was also very interesting and insightful and mission driven. I really liked being surrounded by smart, grounded people who
Mm-hmm.
wanted to have a positive impact on the world. And you know me, like I was always about nature and conservation and sustainability. When you started doing breath work in your, spiritual journey, I thought it was cute. I thought it was nice. I thought it was something that you were exploring and playing with. And I thought, it's a healthy way to be balanced in life. And, I was just like appreciating it from a distance. Um, and it was amongst like one of those workshops that I attended that I felt a shift in energy. And when I say energy, I mean energy of the room. Like we were, I want to say like 30 people or so who came in as strangers, and we did a breath practice together at a bougie gym nearby. And at the end of that session, almost everybody was in tears, and they were hugging each other, and they were sharing their, deepest stories in life, which was just so beautiful to witness. Because it's one thing to be experiencing something because you're my sister and you're interested in it and I want to support you. And it's a very different perspective to see others go through this moment of release, this moment of actually saying, oh, I feel so relieved, right? Like I can actually sit back and relax and share. And, stories are kind of what makes us humans, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
humans will die for a good story. And that's why we still have wars waging in half the world. And it's it was very profound for me to know that we could tap into people's core and make them come together regardless of who they were, what political party they supported, how educated or not they were, what sort of means they had, what they who they were, right? Like who their identity was, because that's how we've become. Our relationships are transactional in nature. We network with an expectation, right? So to see that what you were teaching could have an impact to help us value each other and to value ourselves as humans was actually the first time that I started to take what you were working towards very seriously. And I could see the impact that it could have on the world, both from a, releasing the pain and the suffering, but also to actually drive good in the world from a financial perspective, as well as living in harmony and sustainably perspective. Now I'm just excited to unfold this next chapter, right? Like we have come from a point where you found this modality. I was attracted to it by the impact it was having in the world. And we tried to be this healing for everybody and all walks of life. And then we really did a deep dive into who we want to serve and be very intentional about serving leaders in midlife.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is the start of our upgrade, right? Like we're just building on from here.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, and thank you for partaking in this mission of coming together with me and, seeing the impact that we've had in the world. The
Mm-hmm.
longest running Harvard study on, longevity, they followed people around for 85 years, and they were like, what are the factors that lead to people living the longest? And believe you me, it was actually relationships, and the
Yes.
quality of relationships, and the community. And
Mm-hmm.
that was also a really important data point to saying, like, you might be eating right, you might be working out, you might be taking care of yourself, but if you don't have that community of friends, of intimate relationships where you can truly take your mask off, you can show your heart, you can open your heart and have tough conversations, none of those other things are going to matter. And
Yeah.
especially, when you reach midpoint in your life, and you're in your late 40s, you're in your 50s, and you have everything externally, almost everyone reaches that inflection point on, why am I here, what is my purpose? And I
Mm-hmm.
think through Tattva, we are trying to bring all of these leaders together, all these keystone leaders that have ripple impact on their corporations, on policy making, on how we function in the world, and taking them through this beautiful phase of awakening, if I may, in a very data backed manner, in a very evidence based manner. And there's nothing in my life that I have done so far that has yet been so fulfilling. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's been truly my honor, and now to have you, to welcome you, to leverage all your strategic budgeting, financial skills of implementation.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for what we can accomplish together, for what we can bring to the world. And I'm even more excited to be launching our midlife awakening retreat that is happening later this year, where we're inviting 15 amazing leaders to join us in the blue zones in Costa Rica. And you and I were just there about a week ago, and we had a magical experience.
And
Mm-hmm.
when we are in the hustle of life, we forget how blessed we truly are, especially those of us who can take a step back and reconnect with our intuition, reconnect with the beauty within us and around us, that
Mm-hmm.
truly magic happens. I think that the days we spent at Imiloa, it was absolutely gorgeous. There was a lot of ceremonies we did together. Blue clay was amongst my favorite things to do, which is like a volcanic clay, and you are setting intentions in the clay about two things. One is, what are you letting go of in your life? And the second is, what are you inviting more of in your life?
Mm-hmm.
Going through that process with a clay which is like enriched with 42 minerals, so it's good and gonna make you pretty anyway. But to have
Mm-hmm.
that cathartic experience using the clay and the mud and the waterfall right next to us was just so beautiful. And I think everything else we did, including sound healing, the breathwork session that you led, it just built on top of each other. So I think what I'm really excited about is to recreate that magic with the 15 people who join us towards the end of November, right after Thanksgiving, and help them
Mm-hmm.
take the version of their lives that they're currently living and give them an opportunity to create, to actually be the creator and intentionally build what they want chapter in life to be and awaken the intelligence within. Like, well, is there anything else you want to cover? How are you feeling?
Feeling extremely complete,
Mm.
whole, excited. We have an amazing lineup of guests that I'm going to be interviewing over the next couple of weeks that are ready to take off their mask, to shed their armor, and to share the real, raw stories of their life and to share their wisdom and learnings with us. So I hope you guys stay tuned. And I'm looking forward to a lot more unmasking, unbecoming, and awakening. And hopefully, having some of you join us at the retreat later this year in Costa Rica.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was such a beautiful first episode of the podcast, and I am truly excited to keep listening in.